welcome. What I'm going to be looking at in this video is we're going to be looking at how to use study guides and basically what you need to be aware of and what you need to be wary of when you are using them. Now, yes, most students, very much aware, will be using, or many of you will be using study guides to help you understand or to go through or basically analyze a text. You'll be using resources given to you by your teacher. All of these count as study materials. All right, and the way you've got to treat them is you've got to treat them like a GPS unit in a car. All right, yes, it is very, very useful, but you wouldn't rely on it to take you everywhere. And the main reason for that is because the GPS units, just like study guides, can lead people into lakes, trees, and into the back of other things. All right, they're not things to be relied upon. You use them as basically a guide that will help you get where you need to go, but you don't rely on it to take you the entire way. Nor do you basically copy everything it says to do. All right, because first of all, they're going to be only giving you certain types of insights, certain types of information, which may or may not be relevant to what the question that you're being asked is asking you to do. Okay, so you need to basically be aware of the information that you are collecting. You need to be aware of why you're using them. And you need to basically know what it is that a study guide is going to offer you and where you're going to basically use that information, if you're going to use that information. All right, now most people use study guides. In fact, I'd say virtually everyone, when they are referring to a text of some description, will refer to study guides at some point. They give extra ideas. They give a second opinion. They sort of help you make a decision based on other sorts of evidence provided by other different people. Okay, they will give you some ideas which will point you in the right direction. But as I said, there's a difference between doing that and copying what a study guide has word for word, or using it as the majorative basis for what it is you're trying to say. Okay, you need to value your own ideas. It's probably the most important thing you can do to start with. And be conscious of the benefits that come with analysing a text yourself. And so not to over-rely on it. Not to over-rely on where the GPS is telling you to go. Because, as I said, it can lead you in the wrong direction. It can take you to somewhere where you're basically not intending to go to start with. And of course, with a GPS in a car, of course, you'll be using your own intelligence. You'll be using your own ideas about where you're actually supposed to be going to supplement what it is that the guide does. And the same thing should apply with what you're doing for English. So if you've got completely no idea, then you'll need at least to try and start to come up with some idea before you start really leaning on study guides to take you the rest of the way. Okay, so you need to be aware of where roughly you're going. All right, you need to be aware of what it is that you're trying to do and where it is you're trying to go before you basically punch this in. If you follow it blindly, it's not going to take you in the right direction. All right. Now, study guides, as I said, are useful for a number of purposes. First of all, to get a second opinion. And you should always be looking for a second opinion where you can. All right. So when you interpret a text and say, I think it means that, then the first thing you should be looking for is, well, what does everyone else say? Do they agree with me? Do they disagree with me? If they disagree with me, why do they disagree with me? Because you may find that a second opinion is not always right. And you shouldn't be put off by, if you look in a study guide and you say, I think it means this, and they go, no, it means that. You shouldn't be put off and go, oh, I'm wrong. Okay, I'll just rely on you from now on. No, you look at it and go, does it really? Can my definition still stand up? Is it completely and utterly wrong what I've come up with, and this seems a little bit better? In which case, I would probably use a bit of that, but also start to come up with my own ideas related to it as well. You acquire details and techniques. Okay? Now, particularly for techniques, a lot of them will focus on acquiring different language techniques and things like, particularly for poetry, pentameters, all right? Things that you really need to be an expert in language to really analyze yourself, okay? So study guides are particularly good for those. And they're particularly good for giving you the kinds of information that will basically fill in the gaps that will take you a lot more legwork to do yourself. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that you will form everything based on these techniques that they've chosen, but you will use it to help supplement your ideas. Learn the context of a text. So again, that process of actually having to research the context, you're going to be looking at, yes, probably the author or the composer's history, but also study guides will often include some useful information, particularly more information that's relevant to their text than probably what you would get on something like Wikipedia, for instance. And find key scenes or sections. They will point you to sections which are significant because they've already found significant sections which they've written about or discussed. So you can go, okay, well, this guide seems to focus on that section. I'm going to look at that section as well and look at my own interpretation of that section. Okay, so for those things, yes, a study guide is really quite useful. Now, first of all, it's a reference. You need to look at it as basically something that's a little bit more than a doorstop, but look at it as something that you can actually get a reference from. Okay, so it's not just there that you look at it and then throw it back on the floor again. You need to look at it and continue to look at it. Your best process is to do the following. First of all, use the guide to learn the context of a text before reading it and viewing it. Okay, so before you start, read it to get a bit of a background to it. Because especially when you're reading or viewing a text from, let's just say, the 1700s, then you're going to need it to have a bit of a background to what the 1700s was like and the sorts of stories that were being told and what this story is doing in relation to all those other stories that are being told at the time. Okay, it's going to give you a bit of information about the terminologies used, about the ways that people live, the ways that people acted, all of those things. So to do that at the start is obviously your first step, and you often find that when many people teach text in English, they'll give you a whole heap of information about its background first. Now, most of this stuff is fairly boring and probably photocopied about 10 times, but it has its purposes. And certainly, if you can't be bothered reading usually pages and pages and pages of, let's just say, gibberish, then you can obviously look up information yourself and just get the ideas that you need, especially because you do have something called a search engine that will allow you to really learn what you want to learn about a particular time period or text. And usually it is quite interesting. You will pick up some interesting ideas and some interesting information. You'll learn some things that you'll never found out before. Treat it as an exercise in gaining knowledge for trivia rather than necessarily about really reading or analysing a text. Because that's your second job, is to read and view the text. So take the information, the trivia knowledge that you've got from your research, and then look it up. Read the actual text, or view it. So if it's a film, view it. If it's a book, play, or poem, read it. Then attempt your own analysis. Write your own notes. So upon the completion, you use your inquiry process, you'll use your interpretation skills, you use all those things, and you'll start to pick it apart in your own way. See if you can find some things that you can talk about. And finally, then you use a study guide to check, enhance, or alter your analysis. Alright, so you use it to either go, yep, that's pretty much what I had. Enhance it to say, oh, well, I could actually probably take it there to the point that they've taken it and discuss it in that way, provided, of course, that you're aware of what it is. You actually understand what it is. Or you may even have to completely start afresh and go, yeah, they're probably more correct than I am. And then, of course, you would probably go back and forth between the third and fourth step again. And you may even read or review the text a second time. All right, all those things together will help you get the most out of these guides and will actually give you a lot more information than simply if you just read the whole thing through and go, yep, I remember all that, and then walk into an exam room, because it's not going to work for you. Okay, so how should you not be using study guides? Okay, well, first of all, you shouldn't be using it really to do the following. Go blindly off a cliff. All right? You don't follow it exactly where it tells you to go, because chances are you're going to basically do what they do. And you probably won't have a parachute on your back. All right, so it's a very good idea to start with, that you basically be careful of what it is you're exactly trying to do with what you're looking at in the study guides. All right, and the main thing that you're trying to do is obviously avoid going off a cliff. You need to avoid using it to write your entire argument. Don't use it for that. If you're using it and you really don't you're not clear on what it is you're writing. So if you get an assessment task and go, okay, I'm going to look it up on the internet, I'm going to find all these things that are written in study guides, I'm going to put them all in, I'm going to change some words around so I don't get caught for plagiarizing it and then hand it in. All right. One thing you can almost immediately tell for those kinds of responses is that whoever wrote them has absolutely zero idea what they're talking about. And most of them will have very, very complicated and irrelevant arguments sort of pieced together in an attempt to sort of vainly try and answer the question. And of course, they'll add about 1,000 or 2,000 quotes to try and supplement everything that they've done, which really you're not trying to do. It's not the purpose of what it is you're trying to do in a response, and certainly you're going to get marked down your essay if it seems like what you're writing you don't really understand. Get ideas so you don't have to think of any? Again, another bad idea. All right, you need to try and think of your own ideas because first of all, they're going to be much easier to discuss and to talk about. They're going to be much easier to remember when it comes to interpreting and analysing a text for exam purposes. And especially if you are even doing an extended response, it shows you have much deeper discussion and much greater set of insight if you basically are using your own ideas rather than necessarily relying on someone else's. All right, so at least try and come up with your own ideas first because it's going to give you a much deeper appreciation for the text if you do at least try to have your own ideas about it. Answer different questions in the same way. So in other words, to pre-prepare an answer. Different questions are different. So you need a different what? Different answer. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that if you are using study guides, that you're not using it to sort of prepare a one-size-fits-all type of answer for every kind of question that you might get and then go, I'll just change the topic sentences a little bit, because that doesn't work. I've been given lots of those responses. I mark those kinds of responses all the time. I can tell you one thing, they never ever work. I look at them and go, oh my God, I have no idea what they're talking about. This has nothing to do with the question. I mark it down. And that's basically what you will get if you try and do a one-size-fits-all kind of essay. You really need to think on your feet, and you really need to basically write an essay relevant and inspired by the question rather than trying to attach a pre-prepared essay to a whole heap of different questions. It just works much better that way. And finally, use ideas without questioning their relevance. So if you can't think of an idea and you see it, and you go, oh, that sounds really good, and then chuck it in every argument that you use, you need to sort of go, well, hang on, is it actually relevant to what the question's asking? Is it actually relevant to what I'm trying to say? Because if it's not relevant to either of those things, then there's no point of it being there. You might as well say that roses are red, violets are blue, and I've got something here that doesn't need to be there. All right? So you need to basically make sure that what you're adding is relevant. Now, accuracy and authority is one thing that you can add from a study guide. Basically, it will help you give different interpretations and understanding of a text. All right. But you need to make sure that if you're to use that in interpretation, you need to first of all understand it. You need to be able to validate it, as in find evidence to support it. That you don't just go, well, that's it, and, well, hang on there to quote, or, can't do that. And finally, to ensure that it's relevant to the topic of the question. So you need to check basically those things before you use any kind of interpretation, particularly this first one, understanding it, right? You need to basically know what it is that you're writing. You need to know what it is that you're trying to argue, because it's going to make your argument so much clearer. You don't need to use complicated language or techniques necessarily as your evidence or as your supporting detail, because really simple works just as effectively. All right? There's a major difference between simple detail and basic detail. All right? Details that are simple, that you've explained in a simple way, means that you understand them and you're able to put them in your own words. Basic details are ones that really don't represent anything and are basic. That means you haven't really thought about them too much. All right? So it's not going to be easy, but then again, you can represent it in your own language and in your own way and still get really, really strong marks for it, because you've actually shown that you do properly understand what it is it's trying to suggest. And as I said, you don't have to have the world's greatest vocabulary to be able to do that. So in summary, study guides are that. They're only guides. You shouldn't use it as a case of follow the leader. they can be very useful. Now, don't get me wrong, study guides in particular, this is a study guide. This is to help you with the way that you basically use things. And in this case, we've got a bit of a study guide within a study guide. So they can be very useful. And certainly you would always consult them to give you a bit of advice, a bit of extra help. Just like you do when you're asking questions, interrogating, whenever you receive some sort of tuition, you always basically are using some of their ideas to support the ideas that you're using. All right? And you always need to do that. And finally, you should not rely on them. Okay? You should use them, but not rely on them. So it should be a 50-50 mix of between your effort and the other things, provided, of course, that you choose bits that you understand. Rather than going 100% someone else's work, 0% my own work, pray that where I get a question that sort of matches what this is saying. All right. You are no doubt someone who is probably capable of answering a question in your own voice, in your own eyes, and be able to interpret things for yourself. So use that ability, and don't be afraid to use your opinion. Don't be afraid to use this information to basically go, look, I am going to use study guides, but I'm only going to use them to help me out, rather than necessarily base my entire argument and logic around them. That's really the way that you should be using study guides. Until next time, I'll see you later.